the onboarding has done a very good job of qualifying and priming you to convert, and you're less price sensitive than a lot of teams and founders sometimes assume. I would say the single most impactful change that I've seen for the vast majority of subscription apps that I worked with is you get almost no monetization signals early on. If you have a purchase, you get the first time purchase, but you have no idea how long the LTV curve is going to be.
My name is Jacob Rushfin, founder and CEO of Botsy and the host of the Price Power Podcast. Today, we have Shamanth Rao, founder and CEO of Rocketship HQ, an agency specializing in user acquisition for mobile apps. They've worked with BetterMe, Mojo, Bumble, Codeway, and more, managing 100 million plus in ad spend. In this episode, we talk about how there's no correct payback period and what to do about it, why trial length is product dependent, Shamanth's biggest lever for subscription monetization, why ads don't always need to match the product, and more. Let's go. Hey, Shamanth, great to have you on the podcast. So we were talking earlier about how, most marketers transitioning from these free-to-play games and that kind of world to subscription apps still think in terms of ROAS and these immediate payback periods. We need to get your money back immediately. But is there a mindset shift that they need to make when maybe LTV happens over months or these longer period of times with subscription apps?
I actually have a lot of first-hand perspective because I've seen both those worlds over the last decade or so that I've been actually working. I think the most fundamental difference I see is really about LTV and economics and how they are structured, really. And as background, I actually worked with games for most of my time in house. Was a part of three exits. Managed multiple millions in ad spend, and now at Rocketship HQ, I'm doing a lot of work with subscription apps, and so I've seen both those worlds, if you will. And really, what I've noticed is, in games, there's effectively no ceiling to monetization. And I remember the first game I worked on, this was in 2012 or 2013. This was like a bingo game. I was managing close to 2 million a month. And that seemed insane at the time. But that was the early days of mobile. And things were crazy because it was not saturated. The market was not saturated, and the players were ready to spend. And I noticed something really crazy at the time. A very, very small percentage of players were spending thousands of dollars every week. And these were like middle-aged Americans playing bingo. And there's not even like a fun, sexy game, if you will. But they were spending thousands a week even. And you notice there was that power law. And I'd read about that in books. And just to see this in real life was completely crazy, where you had a very, very tiny percentage of whales who were generating a massive amount of revenue. And, to what we're talking about, right, that's very, very different from subscription apps because there is a ceiling to how much you can monetize. If a person wanted to pay a subscription app a lot of money because they're getting a lot of utility out of it, there's just no way they could do it. Of course, there are evolving models where you could try that, but for the vast majority of subscription apps, you just couldn't do it. So I think that's the fundamental difference. Where with games, there's literally uncapped monetization, and subscription apps there isn't. And if you're looking at all of this from a user acquisition perspective, in games, you get that signal literally in the first 24 hours, which means somebody that's going to spend $10,000 in the first month, they will spend 500 of that in the first day. And that shows up in your acquisition dashboards. That shows up as your D0 ROAS, D1 ROAS. And it's very, very clear. And with subscription apps, and I'm sure you know and you're aware, they could start a trial on day zero, or they could even make a purchase on day zero if there is no trial. But the distribution is not anywhere the same as the games, where you get almost no monetization signals early on. If you have a purchase, you get the first time purchase, but you have no idea how long the LTV curve is going to be. And so, in summary, gaming has high ceilings, early signals, subscription, lower ceilings, delayed signals, and that makes all the difference in the business, in the LTVs and the economics of both genres.
Yeah, and so when you're trying to figure out how to kind of manage your acquisition campaigns, do you think that you need to be bidding on or estimating your acquisition cost, customer acquisition cost on longer time periods where it's maybe not, immediate payback in the first 30 days on that first trial conversion, but it's kind of a longer 3 months, 6 months, or do the kind of top performance marketers still aim for that immediate payback?
Yes and no. I think that can be a function of the company's cash flow, if you will. Because there are a lot of games that are cash flow constrained that they want immediate payback. And, because otherwise you could get paid back in 12 months, but you probably don't have the cash flow to wait 12 months to get paid back. Now, I actually remember a very interesting anecdote from my gaming days. I worked for Words with Friends, which is a hit Scrabble game. I'm pretty sure they're still around. And I noticed their 6 month LTV was terrible. The 3 month LTV was terrible because they were only ad monetized. There was very few IAPs. It was only, I think, to remove ads, and there was nothing else, right? Which meant that early LTV was really bad, but the 24-month LTV was amazing. That's because they had such amazing long term retention, and they're owned by a public company that could invest in a 24-month payback period, right? So I don't think there's any kind of generalized way of saying, look, you need to look at longer payback periods or shorter ones. Even for subscription apps that we work with, sometimes you can only afford to have a 3 month payback period or 6 months, or even like just the first purchase, if you will, right? And we can talk about some of those situations afterwards, hopefully in this conversation. But I would say the time frames for payback, I don't think matter as much based on whether you're gaming or non-gaming.
Yeah, yeah, and so yeah, for specifically subscription apps, even there's not the right payback period. It's more based on your business, based on your cash flow. That we would all love to be able to bid on acquire new users based on long payback periods, but a lot of subscription apps, smaller companies, you need faster cash flow, and I think there's probably also advantages. Maybe correct me if I'm wrong. There's advantages that if you're have a faster feedback loop, if your ads are performing. If you wait too long, the monetization could change, right? Where if
Yeah,
you're waiting 3 months, six
yeah,
months to actually assess that something could have changed and your predictions are no
yeah.
longer correct.
100%. And I think that's definitely a challenge with subscription apps where you have to wait at least a month or two to understand what the downstream monetization is. And if your plans skew heavily towards monthly or weekly, that is not enough. 1 to 2 months is not enough to say what your long-term LTV is going to be. That's really challenging. And again, you contrast that with games where you don't have the monthly cadence, if you will, monthly or weekly cadence. So there, you have more of a daily cadence of purchases. So within 7 to 14 days, you have enough of an idea of how users are monetizing to understand what your D365 ROAS LTV is going to be. With Whereas with subscriptions, it's just hard to make even an estimate based on a few weeks or months of data.
Yeah, yeah, and you were you had mentioned previously that in another conversation or something I was reading that the LTV CAC ratios can be misleading for subscription apps. I think that's kind of touches upon what we're talking about, right? Is that right? How do you think about that?
Yeah, I think a lot. I like to say LTV is a made up number because it doesn't make sense without context. You know, or in an ideal world, you would say my 12-month LTV from iOS in the US on Facebook is so much, right? You need all of those qualifiers for the word LTV to make sense. And without that context, it's really meaningless, I would say. Right. And the other reason why I think it's a made up number is it's theoretical, if you will, because uh, as we were just talking about it, only way to make LTV actionable is in context of your cash flow. You say, look, can I wait for so much time to get paid back? Yes or no. That's the wait for LTV to be actionable. And without that context and nuance, it can be a really misleading metric. And I've seen basically investor pitch decks that founders have shared, which is like, oh, our LTV to CAC ratio is amazing. It's XYZ. And I'm like, you need to define what LTV means. Oh, yeah. So that's the short version. And yeah,
Yeah, we should probably just stop using LTV because if we have to put all these qualifiers on it, if you think it stands for lifetime value, but then if we say it's 12-month LTV, 12-month lifetime value, it doesn't even make sense
yeah,
anymore. And so we
exactly.
should probably just get rid of the
Yeah,
LTV term in
yeah,
general. It's an easy, understandable term, but it's not really
yeah,
what we're looking for.
yeah, yeah.
And so what do you think people should aim for instead? Just those kind of shorter terms, like 3-month returns, 3-month return on ad spend, or payback period. What do you think is a better kind of substitute?
Yeah, I wouldn't say ditch the word LTV. I would just say use it with care, if you will, and certainly pair
Yeah,
it with payback period, like you're suggesting. Right? You would say, look, my 3 month LTV is so much, and therefore my CAC needs to be $25 on trials, $45 on purchases on first time subscribers for me to be profitable. And I think if we have that nuance, it's a clearer picture for contextualizing LTV. So I wouldn't necessarily dish the word LTV, but I would just have all of those qualifiers to make sure it actually makes sense.
there it's time bounded, specific definition. We actually understand what we're talking about, how it
Yeah.
relates. Yeah, so that makes sense. So we're talking about kind of revenue coming in. I think that we can launch all these paywall tests. We can convert users better with different ads and creative, but um, people pay for your app. The price that you're charging for your app um, makes a pretty big difference. Have you seen any impactful results or impactful changes from a pricing change that can really change growth?
Oh, massively, because price is easily the single most important thing that governs your unit economics. And because that can make or break whether your app is profitable and growing or just unable to hit the CAC targets that you need to hit. And I would say the single most impactful change that I've seen is that I've seen for the vast majority of subscription apps that I worked with is to increase the share of users who offer annual plans. And this is obviously purely from a user acquisition perspective. Uh, and obviously, this is because once someone's converting to an annual plan, you as the developer and or a marketer are not really worrying about the month-to-month retention. We were just talking about like, look, 1 month or 2 months after a user installs, you have no idea what their LTV is if they're on a monthly plan. But if they're on an annual plan and you're getting $70, $80 upfront, your 1 year LTV is taken care of. You're not worried about retention. Yes, you might still offer a terrible product experience. It might be, you know, you might get terrible reviews. That's always that risk. Uh, but just from a user acquisition unit economics perspective, that's one less thing for you to worry about. Uh, Now, obviously, it's not like you flip a switch and suddenly everyone picks annual. You still have to experiment. You have to figure out the right onboarding. You have to figure out the right presentation of the paywall. And I'm sure you have a lot more expertise than I do in a lot of this. Uh, but again, I would say as a developer, as a founder, my suggestion would be if there's one thing you could focus on, it would be to get more users on annual plans. And and as a corollary to that, I would also look at the actual pricing of the annual plan. And I don't know what your experience has been, Jacob, but in the vast majority of cases that I have seen, increasing annual plan prices generally has led to higher revenue. Uh, and my hypothesis is if you're buying an annual, you are already pre sold, you're high intent, and the onboarding has done a very good job of qualifying and priming you to convert. And you're less price sensitive than a lot of teams and founders sometimes assume. So my encouragement to literally everyone we work with is to see how far you can push the annual plan pricing. And of course, there's also the option to test a lifetime plan, which I know some marketers, some developers have done, which is also an option to look at as well. And obviously, all of this presupposes that the product is actually offering real sustained utility. It's not a scam app, although you could argue for a scam app, you could still use many of the same tactics. Uh, yeah, and so, in summary, I would say just the annual plan, if there was one thing you could focus on, one strategy you could really focus on, it would be the annual plan. And you can really change the profile. You can really change the payback profile of a subscription app through that focus.
Yeah, I agree. I think it's like you say, it's even more important when you're growing through paid user acquisition because you get that money back faster. So even if you're making, let's say you have annual and monthly, even if you're making the same amount of money from both the annual and monthly plan, which is never usually the case,
Yeah.
but let's say you are, it still is beneficial for you to get that money up front to
Yes.
reinvest in paid acquisition
Yes.
and be able to grow faster. And also just predictable because something could happen, people can churn. And I think that's, generally consumer retention and consumer renewals is pretty low. And we think, you may look at, Spotify or Netflix and say, oh, well, they have monthly plans. They do okay. It's like, yeah, well,
Yeah.
they're Spotify and Netflix. You can't compare yourselves to these
Exactly.
world-class companies
Yeah.
and so I think there's some cases, and I think it varies by product. Sometimes having a monthly plan for some people, depending on your use case, where maybe it's a shorter term use case, it's not a kind of long term value, and they want to use the product for a few months, makes sense. Just price your monthly plan higher, and so that it balances out the higher churn rates that you're going to get, and you can drive more annual. Yeah, I completely agree. I'm curious. I've Do you have any good learnings on like for an annual plan trial length? Do you default to, I think the normal is 7 days. Do you have you seen good success with like 3 days or longer trials? Or first, do you have kind of heuristics in your mind that certain types of products work better for with longer trials or shorter trials?
You know, it's been very product dependent, but something I've seen is
Yeah.
something that's a little more casual use product. Let's just say one of the study talk apps or some of the AI apps, which you could call as almost an impulse purchase, if you will. And those would tend to benefit from slightly shorter trials because they aren't really that invested. They just want to try something out, if you will. That's sort of one heuristic I've seen, but really, I think there's just been the range of across the different products that we've seen.
Yeah, yeah. I'm always just curious what other people have seen there because yeah, I think there's if your product needs more time to be discovered, then yeah, a longer trial may make sense. But a lot of times, if you can have a shorter trial
Yeah,
and people can get the value quickly, convert faster, and all that
yeah,
stuff.
yeah.
And yeah, yeah, it makes sense. And so, how do you? So there's the price can be very impactful for um, converting users and starting that trial. But for subscription apps, you need to sell that like the immediate value that people are getting, but then you're also trying to build that longer term habit so people renew. But this often starts in your advertising, right? Where you're trying to sell the product early on. Do you have any thoughts on how you kind of balance these like early immediate value and also long term habits with kind of your ads and creative strategy?
Yeah. So short answer, you don't balance those two. Uh,
Okay.
you, yeah, you know, and I can speak to a lot of this from first-hand data. Just background, obviously, we run a lot of user acquisition and creative for subscription apps. But what I also do is I run a weekly segment on LinkedIn and YouTube where every week I'm deconstructing one brand through our AI agent, which is called Brute Force AI. And Jacob, I've shown what I'm building to you, sort of under the hood. But what the agent does is it's basically looking at a couple hundred ads for each brand every week and it's spotting patterns. And I've done like at least 20, 25 brands now, not counting folks that I've analyzed for our clients. And one clear pattern stands out, which is almost nobody's just emphasizing long-term habit formation in ad creatives. Definitely not in the headline or the hook. And and I actually hadn't sort of connected the dots on this, but then as I sort of looked through a lot of these deconstructions of like 2025 brands, I'm like, goodness, nobody's doing this. And when you think about it, it kind of makes sense because the job of the first 3 seconds, the hook or the headline, is not to sell the habit. It is to grab attention, is to spark anticipation, is to give some immediate value, even if it's anticipated value. Right? They can't really try the app on the ad in the ad, but they can at least imagine what the value is going to be, which could be I'm going to lose weight, I'm going to bulk up, or I'm going to lose my postpartum belly, if you will. And with all of that, you don't want the user to do extra homework in that moment. You have to think about where they are. Like they're like doom scrolling, Insta and TikTok, and you're like, by the way, you have to spend 75 minutes every week, like trudging to the gym and lifting heavy things. I don't think I make it sound miserable enough, but or you have to sit still for 40 minutes 3 times a week. If you make it sound really hard, yes, of course, that's part of the journey. That's part of the journey of habit formation. But if that's the first thing you hear, that's not going to convert. Or really, so really the goal of the hook, the headline really needs to be to interrupt the scroll, to be that pattern interrupt, to interest them, make them think, this looks useful, this looks simple, this looks doable. Uh, really highlights speed to value in that. Now, obviously, there is always the risk that you can go the other extreme and you can say lose 20 pounds overnight. You don't want to do that either. And because then it's like no one's going to believe you. No one's going to believe the ad. You're going to get a lot of negative comments and your conversions are going to drop. Right. So yes, you have to uh, pattern interrupt them through the hook or the headline. With the body, that's where you layer in the process and the details. By the way, even in the body, you don't talk about how miserable going to the gym is going to be, how hard it's going to be, right? If you've never worked out for, I don't know, 3 years, it's really hard. I've been that guy who's not worked out forever and gone to the gym. And I'm like, you don't want to talk about that in the body. Uh, so, but you talk about the process, you talk about the progression, you make the promise believable and realistic. So just to make sure it doesn't sound like an impossible overnight transformation, just to make sure it doesn't look like a gimmick. And you can show, look, here's your day one, here's your day seven, here's how you progress. You can talk about that. You can talk about, look, here's the pains you're going through. If you have, let's just say, perimenopause, here's the symptoms you're facing. And make them feel seen, make them feel understood, but really don't give them homework in the ad. And again, actually, in preparation for this call, I kind of knew this sort of conclusion that giving homework doesn't work. But I actually looked back at every one of the deconstructions I've done and actually checked to see, have I missed something here? There's just one brand that I noticed that seemed to emphasize long-term habit formation. And this was not like all of their ads. There's some ads that did that, right? And this exception was Duolingo. And when you think about it, it makes sense that they emphasize streaks and habit formation in their ads because that's a meme on TikTok, right? People post about, oh, this is my streak on Duolingo, So kind of makes sense that has some kind of social resonance. So I I can imagine and I can understand why Duolingo would lean into habit formation. But for literally every other subscription app, I would say don't give users homework. Don't tell users how hard the habit formation can be. Make it seem easy. Give them that instant gratification up front. Uh, Again, there's a time and place for building that habit. It's in the onboarding. You're priming them. The first time user experience post paywall. You're delivering immediate value. So, hopefully they can stick, but don't do that before they click.
Yeah, the Duolingo example is interesting, where I think that you could almost think of those as kind of retargeting ads because everybody knows Duolingo, so it's not like it's your first impression.
Yeah,
And I started getting I think retargeting ads on Duolingo where they're like, "Come back to Duolingo" on YouTube.
yeah,
But essentially everyone knows Duolingo. It's not like you have to make a first impression anymore.
yeah.
You're aware, so I think that makes sense. Um, yeah, the thinking of all your ads is just getting that early impression, selling that immediate value makes a lot of sense. I think, I started my marketing career in kind of the email marketing world where it's kind of like the subject line of your email.
Yeah.
Um, a lot of times you want to have a subject line that makes sense to your email, but it doesn't have to relate perfectly. The goal is just get someone to open the email, then once they're in, they're in.
Yeah.
And it's kind of
Yeah.
like the ad. Once they click and get into your app, it's
Yeah.
a whole new ball game.
Yeah.
And you don't have to, yes, ideally you want your ads to be cohesive and coherent and have continuity from your ad to the app store to the product. But, you see so many ads today that, are have very little relevance to the actual product, but still perform very well.
Yes. 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 And that's not to get off on a tangent, right? But this also is a classic illustration of everything we're talking about, right? Which, if they have nothing to do with the product, but they still grab attention, that's great. That's the whole point of the ad. And oftentimes, as an example, internally we are reviewing and we are testing what we call like cringe ads, if you will. And the best examples I can give would be if you can look at any of the micro learning apps, they lean heavily into these. It's like the headline is "Be an alpha man" or "Be the woman that he's chasing." They're gendered, which is,
Yeah,
again, as a
yeah,
marketer, I find fascinating. And it's like, download this app, spend 15 minutes a day, stop doom scrolling, rebrand yourself and be the alpha man. And I'm like, this is a reading app. On the surface, it has nothing to do with being an alpha man or being the woman he wants to chase. And when I think about it, I'm like, but I'm also like married and have a kid. I'm not the target market. And if someone's like, I want a quick hack for how I can be an interesting dude, how I can be a cool dude, I don't know. It's not a demographic I can personally relate to, but I can understand why there's a certain kind of person that would stop scrolling when they see something that I would consider cringy. Because yeah, and I think that's a classic illustration. And I always thought that's also a useful reminder for me because I have to remind myself I'm not the target market. And sometimes it's useful to think in terms of what frame of mind the user is in when they're scrolling.
Yeah, yeah. I think I notice myself even sometimes scrolling. It's like, oh, I want to be cool. I want to be an alpha, and like, and I have to shake myself. Like, what am I? What am I? It's like it taps into some subconscious
Yeah,
thing, and it makes you stop, and then you realize, what am I doing?
yeah,
This is ridiculous, and
yeah,
you
yeah,
go past it. What's your and I think that touches upon the emotional element, right?
yeah,
Ads have to be emotional
yeah.
to kind of get you to stop. So do you have strong viewpoints on whether, um, these ads that are maybe not directly connected to the product are, viable in the long term, or are they? Is there some kind of brand erosion that may happen if you kind of do these types of ads, or does it not really matter if it works?
It's a question that's hard to answer in a way that's falsifiable or not, if you will. Uh,
Yeah.
I've seen, I, what I can say is, I've seen very many products, both on gaming and non gaming, grow substantially by leading into what you might describe as fake ads. Interestingly, both on gaming and also non gaming, I've seen products adapt themselves to the ads. And this was obviously a trend much more that started on gaming. And for those of your listeners who may not have that context, I think this was about 4 or 5 years ago. There's this game called Homescapes. I'm pretty sure they were the pioneers of this, but they would have misleading ads that was like that would show a pull the pin puzzle that was not even in the game, right? That had nothing to do with the game, and that would convert like crazy. And what they did was they put pull the pin as a mini game inside the game because the ads were doing well, you know, and there's something very similar you could do with ads, and I'm starting to see that in some verticals, particularly. Especially reading and edtech is an easy fit because you can adapt what a user sees inside the kind of genres and the kind of content a user sees to what's in the ad. And it certainly is easy to have a custom product page or a landing page if you have web to app to be adapted to that. But definitely, I think your original question was, is there a risk that your brand gets eroded? There certainly is, but you could change your brand itself based on what you see users are responding to, what you see users are resonating with. That's certainly a direction that I would encourage more founders and marketers to think about.
Interesting. So seeing actually being informed by the ads, where ads are kind of informing your product roadmap or product direction, where clearly there's some interest. If people are interested in these
Yeah,
ads, how can you
yeah,
capture that interest?
yeah, right. And again, this does not have to be a very extreme situation, if you will, right? If it's like be an alpha man, you don't have to be a dating advice app overnight. That's a bit of a
Yeah.
stretch, right? So obviously there are limits to that. But again, as an example, right, we are working with without giving away too many details. There's a fintech app, and a lot of ads depict ways you can use credit cards to benefit, if you will, right? To unlock offers, to unlock deals, if you will. And we noticed that a certain segment of ads that were doing really well showed and featured travel, and we were like, oh, airline miles, here's the secret of the travel hackers and so on and so forth. And then we were like, oh, this is kind of resonating. What can we do about it? Could we have a custom product page about this? And um, could we reflect this in some part of the onboarding? And again, going from a credit card focused ad to a travel focused ad on the surface would seem like a huge leap, but you absolutely could modify uh, your app store page and your onboarding to reflect at least some elements of that, and certainly whatever is in the product itself.
Yeah, one example, and I've seen this I think a few different times, different examples of this same thing is where these kind of surveys or quizzes
Yeah,
in ads perform well, where it's like, what's your
yeah,
sleep type? What's your
yeah,
mental health something or other? And then they add this little hidden module in the app
yeah,
that it exists, or kind of show something in onboarding where the simple quiz, where it's not really connected to the product or the true product value, but it performs that kind of hook of answer these questions, learn X in this quiz flow, performs well in the ad, people get clicked, they get into the app, they can maybe get that quiz and
yeah.
then convert into the core product.
Yeah, and that's also a monetization lever, right? Because then you're like, oh, what kind of, I don't know, what kind of, this is, sitting in my mind, what kind of sleeper are you, right? So, and then you go through the
Mhm.
onboarding questionnaire. The last question is going to be, oh, we have your answer. Pay $7 to find out your sleep style, and you can
Yeah.
basically monetize them right there. And I've seen that work surprisingly well for a lot of products, including I've also seen what some might call a gray area slash dark pattern-ish thing, where there's a quiz ad, there's a quiz onboarding. The last thing is get your answer for only 99 cents, and you get your answer for 99 cents. You get the renewal, the subscription gets renewed without really explicit consent. And obviously, if this is a web onboarding, you don't really have to play by Apple's rules or anything. So you basically, the first bill is 99 cents, and the user's like, "Yay, I got 99, I got this deal for 99 cents." And the users doesn't even know they're going to get billed again in 7 days or 30 days. And lo and behold, the second bill is like $10 or $15. And that's hidden in the small print. And I've seen that bit of a gray area in a couple of products.
Yeah, and I think we probably both agree that that's probably not the way to a sustainable long-term business where that's not going to work forever, but
Yeah,
people can take advantage of it short term.
yeah.
Yeah, that, and I think one last thing I'm curious your take here on is in terms of those upsells. You mentioned kind of these, the one-off offers. I've been seeing more and more subscription apps having success, kind of with these upsells or after you start a trial, offering another PDF upsell or something else that's a kind of an in-app purchase. Have you seen success with that too?
Feel that where there's some information component to this, right? For again, this is like without disclosing too much, there's a cooking there's an app in a cooking space, and they're like, oh, you can get access to a free community, you can get access to free recipes. And yeah, again, if there is I think that's the most common situation I've seen. uh, the other example, I don't think it fits exactly the mold of the upsell that you're talking about, is pay as you go models that I've seen being very interesting. I do think I could be wrong, and you're probably more knowledgeable about this than I am. I think Tinder was one of the pioneers of the pay as you go, where you could pay for more likes on top of your Tinder goal or whatever. You could do that. But lately, I'm also seeing that with a lot of AI products and apps, where you have a certain amount of credits and you can pay as you go if you take up more credits, which I think was something they were actually forced to do, because normally with a lot of subscription products, the cost of delivering the service is zero, but for AI products, it's not. So if you are a heavy user, you have to be, sometimes the app has to bill you in a way that's different.
Yeah, I think that these AI products are sometimes approaching more the economics of games, where you have these like whales that spend tons on credits. I don't think quite the same scale yet, but a lot of them are kind of similar with this kind of credit based approach. And then there's the whole the whole AI girlfriend category, which is a whole other black box of
Yeah.
paying and credits and yeah.
Yeah, and I would
Uh,
actually agree that these have more in common with games than, I don't want to say more in common, but a lot in common with games because, you know, they're not finite and controlled in the way that a lot of utility subscription apps would be. Now, I use a lot of code AI copilot tools, and you can keep going, and they can be addictive in many ways, and that's certainly true of AI girlfriend apps, if you will.
yep, yep. Cool. So I think something that is hard for people to understand what it really means for who's newer in the kind of advertising and paid advertising world is creative fatigue. And so I would love to talk a little bit about that for kind of one, you're running advertisements where you guys, run ads for a lot of different apps and for subscription apps. Um, how do you how do you combat creative fatigue when you're scaling up from, let's say, I don't know, 50K to all the way to for 500K, different challenges, different problems, but how do you think about that? Is it creative volume? Is it different approaches? Yeah. How do you kind of combat this creative fatigue?
Yeah, I think the short version is volume, diversity, and strategy. All three are super important. By strategy, and the first step is don't put out AI slop and really think through what's going on. But to elaborate, right? So yes, you definitely need volume of creative, and I like to call this the best way I can think of to describe why is because Meta has what we call internally as micro segments of users. So, you want creative that appeals to different micro segments. So, for example, a micro segment could be a millennial mom on the east or west coast of the United States working in a tech job, just had a baby, wants to lose belly fat. Right? That's one super micro segment. And something else could be Debbie from Kansas, retired, 55, getting old, wants to get stronger. Those are two very, very different micro audiences, micro segments. Meta has got very, very good at identifying those segments to target them. And as marketers, we need to be making sure to have creative that speaks to every micro segment, to as many micro segments as possible. So to tie into your thing about creative fatigue, that's why you need a high volume of creative so you can speak to every micro segment. And that's also why you need a diversity of formats. And we internally have a matrix where we say, look, we need faceless UGC, AIGC image, mm, image ads, and we need all of that for every big messaging pillar that we might need. For a kids app, it might be build confidence, healthy screen time, parents can relax. So it's really 4 multiplied by 4 in most cases, and that's really critical because again, I think of this one time when we were scaling this product. We were like at, I think we started at 500 a day, things were going well, we went to 1,000 in a week. The next week we were like 3,000, 5,000, and we were like doing spending 10,000 a day, and we were like, a lot of that spend, 70% of that spend is on one ad. That was terrifying. And sure enough, 3 days later, that ad crashed. I'm like, goodness. And then you're like, fiddling your finger, fiddling your thumbs, and you're like, what do I do? We're spending 10 grand a day. Performance has crashed. We're not like at 500 a day. How many days do you wait, right? And after 3 days, we're like, all right, we're gonna go back to like 500 a day and go easy. So I say that because a big part of combating creative fatigue is managing risk because you could test hundreds of creatives, and if Meta gives spend to one creative, Meta gives 70% of spend to one creative, there's nothing you can do that to combat that creative fatigue because Meta just has that Bayesian system which gives spend to one ad. And I think a big part of managing creative fatigue is also to take control back from Meta's Advantage Plus structures, automated structures, and to have manual tests, manual campaigns and ad groups, because that way you de-risk yourself substantially. And again, in that situation, when you're going from 500 to 10,000, we would be less on the edge if we had de-risked ourselves by saying, right, we're scaling. Let's have five different ad groups. Let's scale the top one to 5,000, but let's just have some other ads in these other buckets, which is also why creative volume and diversity becomes important, because your top ads at 5,000, hopefully you have something else that's spending 1,000 and doing it profitably. You have something else that's at 1,500 that's doing it profitably, right? So that's a big piece of combating creative fatigue, which is really managing risk intelligently by taking back the control from the automated systems.
For those micro segments, do you use those to kind of inform creative production? Do you use those as kind of personas to hypothesize what ads we should create? I really like that kind of concept of these micro segments.
Yeah, yeah, 100%. And that's a big part of our creative briefs. We're like, look, what is the target audience? And is there a slightly different target audience we can go after with this ad? And one of the questions we ask ourselves is, if this ad is winning, can we target something else, a different segment, right? So again, this is for product that's targeting small businesses. We were like, hey, we said, if you're a restaurant owner, blah, blah, blah. And we are like, could we just keep, and that's what's doing really well. That was a top performer. Then we're like, all right, can we change that to if you're a real estate agent, if you're a bar owner, if you're a startup founder,
Got it.
right? And it doesn't have to be rocket science, right? It's uh, I learned improv at one point of time, and one of the things they taught me was the secret of improv is to ask yourself, if this is true, what else is true? So you ask yourself, if something's working for restaurants, could you say bar owners, real estate agents? So you can certainly go down that path.
Got it. And so you can start with maybe your high level demographic definitions that
Yeah,
men are 25 to 45 in X doing X thing. But then when you actually break it down, there's tons of these little micro segments within which actually help you create these specific ad creatives because that's what you want, right? You don't
yeah,
want these broad general things. The more specific you can speak to somebody, that's how you
yeah,
get emotional.
yeah, yeah.
Yeah, that is great. That's great. So, and I know you touched upon it a little bit. Everybody's trying to use um, AI to generate creatives for your apps. How do you do that well? How do you make sure they actually are emotional and create some emotional resonance with them, and they kind of create that immediate value? Do you have any kind of guidance for people?
Yeah. I think the short version is involve smart humans that kind of know the shit, if you will. But I say this all the time on our team. It's very, very easy to make hundreds of terrible ads today, and I also say this to literally every one of our customers. We all know the cost of making ads is zero. That's no longer a differentiator for anybody, right? And I think, and as you said, I think the biggest differentiator is to make ads that are emotionally layered, that sound like they're human speaking. That's not a crazy AI slop, if you will. So there's a couple of things we do to make sure we try to stay human, if you will. What something I always have my team do is not take the first answer AI gives, and then making a brief. The On our team, the deal is you have to push the AI at least five times with follow-ups. Adding emotional context, talking about the lived experience of users, rewrite with specificity, and again, I send back edits all the time on copy and briefs. Um, and something else that we also do is I talked about the deconstruction I do. This is literally every week. I've probably analyzed and seen like hundreds of thousands of ads out there, right? So I think that helps myself and our team, and our team reviews every one of these to really understand what the patterns are, right? Because it's not like, oh, I see this ad, it looks cool, it looks entertaining. Now they can pattern match and say, aha, here's this cringe ad that I saw for an ed tech. Can I adapt that to a fintech that I'm working on today? And I think that's where a lot of the unexpected wins can come from. And really noticing and asking ourselves why some of these ads are doing well, why some of these ads are performing, right? And again, much like going to the gym, it's not a one and done thing. That's why I do this every week. That's why I do these deconstructions every single week and share publicly and with our team to see why something may be working.
Yeah, yeah, I think that makes a lot of sense. Where don't just accept what AI gives you, look at it, assess it, apply that kind of human touch, and then also push whatever tool you're using to generate AI for more, iterate,
Yeah,
edit, make better and
yeah,
better. And then I love the looking to other industries for inspiration, not just direct competitors. Kind of look outside your specific app industry. That makes a lot of sense. Um, well, cool. This was super informative, and I really appreciate you coming on, Shamanth. Do you want to give a quick pitch or shout out to Rocketship HQ and kind of all the work you're doing there?
yeah. Yeah. Rocketship HQ, we're a performance creative agency, and our big focus is subscription apps. We work with some of the biggest subscription apps out there. Center, Bedemy, Lingo Kids, Mojo, among others. And we've been really focused on scaling creating performance through creative using AI and humans. And as I've said a couple of times in this episode, so a big thing we do is just use our AI agent, brute force AI, that really breaks down ads frame by frame. And I share a lot of these learnings publicly. So feel free to check out my socials if you want to see some of these. I try to share at least once a week. And of course, if anyone that's listening to or following this podcast is interested in having your own creative mix analyzed, I'm happy to offer a fully complimentary audit. Just I would basically look at all the ads you're running, run them through our agent, see what are the patterns. And these patterns would be, here are the pain points you have, here's the FOMO triggers, here's the emotional triggers, here's the narrative structures. There's a bunch of dimensions we look at to, number one, understand what's going on in the ad, but also to see and have the ad sound more human, if you will.
I love it. I love it. And you also have a podcast and newsletter yourself, right? Can they? Where do they go for that?
Yeah, this is a new podcast. It's called Intelligent Artifice, and that's about how the operators and marketers in the world use AI. So you can go check that out on intelligentartifice.net, and also have a newsletter that goes out at least once a week, intelligentartifice.git.com. So feel free to sign up, check that out, and that's the hub for all things interesting and cool that I'm learning through AI and creative today.
Awesome. Yeah, we can link all those in the show notes so people can go find those. Well, cool. I really appreciate having you on, and I learned a lot here as well. So, yeah, thanks again.
Thank you, Jacob, for having me. These are great questions. So I appreciate you going into the kind of that you did.
All right, thanks. Talk to you later. Bye.
Thanks for listening. Hope you enjoyed. Please go to pricepowerpodcast.com to see all the episodes. Go to Spotify and YouTube and give us a subscribe and follow so you don't miss any episodes. All right, talk to you next time.